Milei, you and your government are supporting Rafael Grossi as a candidate for Secretary General of the UN. This year, a new Secretary General will be chosen. It's Latin America's turn, and the choice is between him, Michelle Bachelet from Chile, and very few other candidates. If Grossi wins, what changes would you like to see at the UN?
Grossi has a very concrete agenda, and in part to start changing this image that the United Nations has taken on, which truly is one failure after another, right? Because the Millennium Initiative was a failure, the 2030 agenda a failure, and the new agenda, which would be, let's say, like a reloaded 2030 agenda, is also going to be a failure. So let's say we need to try to start getting out from that UOC format, which only serves to feed bureaucracy but doesn't improve anyone's quality of life.
In concrete terms, what would that mean? And
to start moving away from the so-called UOC agenda, we need to start...
What's the UOC agenda?
Take the agenda. 20, 30, well, they're all very nice sounding titles, but the consequences are disastrous for the world. So what needs to be done is for the UN to return to its original mandate, which was to be a space where countries came together to try to avoid conflicts and improve relations. Not this business of imposing agendas that destroy countries.
Is this UN issue an important topic for you? Did you bring this up with President Trump when you were with him or with other US officials?
United States, but clearly we have a vision that is fully aligned regarding the UN, both with President Trump and as well as with Benjamin Netanyahu.
But this issue will be decided among the major powers. The United States, China, Russia, France, Great Britain. Do you think that Argentina Rossi will have the support of the United States?
I believe so too.
China?
I don't know.
France?
I don't know. There are things that are clearer to me, and besides, some of them don't depend on me. I can speak about the things that do depend on me, or the ones I know best, but there are others that...
If not...
I would be just a typical politician who answers anything without knowing.
Let's talk a bit about Argentina and your relationship with President Trump. You and your government dealt a heavy blow to Kirchnerism in the October elections for the legislative seats. Afterwards, Trump suggested that your victory was thanks to him. Is that true? Did you win thanks to Trump?
I believe we won thanks to a combination of factors, among which the support we've received from the United States has clearly played a fundamental role. Argentina, starting from the period between March and April of this current year, our initiatives began to face significant challenges. This occurred when our comprehensive program began to be systematically sabotaged and fiercely undermined by the forces of Kirchnerism and by those individuals who, on various occasions, sought to gain a specific political advantage, even if they might have been theoretically closer to our core ideas, so to speak. This unfortunate situation led directly to a series of highly unfavorable votes within Congress and a constant aggressive attack on the stability of the economic program. Ultimately, this entire process resulted in a massive speculative attack totaling approximately $41 billion. Basically, that's approximately 50% of M2. There has never been such a brutal attack on a program as in this case, and yet it withstood it. Already in the final stretch, we received explicit support from the United States. Let's say with concrete assistance. Now the concrete assistance, let's say, was $2 billion, so within, compared to the size of the attack, it's only 5%. I mean, you're not going to come up with a theory to explain 5%. What happened is that it played a fundamental role in changing expectations and sentiment, because when you saw the US Treasury on the other side of the market, you thought, well, things are heading in a different direction here. So yes, it truly played a key role in being able to manage those expectations. And the truth is that, given the way things work in Argentina, that help has been very important.
There was a lot of speculation here in Argentina about what Argentina offered in return. Was there any offer made to President Trump's administration regarding anything like valuable rare earth minerals?
Texas, we did a swap, let's say. Argentina is an ally. The United States decided to give us their support. And that's what's happening. And also...
There was no quid pro quo. And
no. In fact, let's say...
So we're not going to hear in 3, 5, 6 months that Argentina is offering a mega prison for deportees from the United States or something like that?
No, that's not under discussion at all.
Mr. President, speaking of that, are you concerned that Argentinians, Venezuelans, Colombians, people from many other countries who were legally in the United States, legally in the sense that they were processing their paperwork, are being arrested in the streets and sometimes deported to countries that aren't even their own? Does that concern you?
That's an issue of U.S. domestic policy, and I have no reason to get involved in that.
But some of those deported are Argentinians?
Well, when it comes to Argentinians, I will use diplomatic channels to respond and, let's say, to look after the well-being of Argentinians.
But there have been cases. It's not just a hypothetical situation.
But then again, you must remember that each individual government ultimately determines its own specific policies. So when you look, one of the very important lessons you learn when you actually have to sit in the electric chair, and by the electric chair, I mean that particular chair over there.
The presidential chair?
Exactly.
With
Messi's jersey on it.
I see. Did he give it to you?
No, the brand sent it to me. I have 2 signed by him, but that's not one of them. But this is the brand new one. And here is the main point. When you truly internalize the sheer number of restrictions you have when making these decisions, I can personally assure you that you would feel quite embarrassed to give recommendations not only about the current situation in Bhutan and beyond, other governments in other countries, but you'd even feel embarrassed to give your opinion about your own country.
So you're telling me that it worries you, but it doesn't worry you?
No. What I'm saying is that the set of restrictions one faces as president are much greater than people imagine, and it's an act of irresponsibility to comment on another country's politics. I mean, each country. Recently, someone asked me, what would you recommend to such and such leader? Nothing. No, but you did. I can talk about what I did in Argentina, how I did it, why I did it, but I also know about a lot of restrictions. Some are more transparent, easier to understand, and others are much more complicated.
Regardless of whether you agree or not, you're telling me that for pragmatic reasons you can't comment on this topic. That's what you're telling me.
Of course, but look, let me put it this way. I don't know, let's say if Argentinians will decide that I stay for 2 more years or 6 more years. Let's suppose I serve 2 terms. According to the rules under which I started, that means that let's say I leave politics. In fact, once I finish, whether it's my first term or my second term, I won't be in politics anymore.
That's something I want to ask you about later, Mr. President, because I've interviewed many presidents and many have told me the same thing.
Well,
let's say
I recommend you look at the history of each one of them, where they come from and how I am, and you'll realize that, let's say, it's not just for show. But beyond that, which is what's important, in fact, the day I finish this, I plan to go live alone in the countryside with my dogs and dedicate myself to writing and giving lectures.
I'll remind you of that, Mr. President, because President Menem, whom I interviewed here, said the same thing. He did very well in his first term.
Well, let me tell you something.
Usually it happens in the second term.
Listen.
And he got carried away.
Well, let me tell you.
Another who went through that.
Let me tell you something. In fact, since that represents my ideal life, a few days ago I asked myself why I felt I had to wait such a long time to finally achieve that sense of balance and harmony. I live in a place that's a 28-hectare estate. So, do you know what I did? There's a little house, let's say, where the tools were kept. I fixed it up and moved in there. Do you understand? I don't think the way other people do. I've already discovered what brings me happiness in my life. And I act on that, I act according to that. That is the goal you have in life, is to be happy. When you discover what makes you happy, that's it, you do that. For me, this is a job.
But power is intoxicating, President.
Well, that's fine, but the point is, why do you want power?
No. I'm asking you critically.
No, but I already know. I know very well why some people want power. Generally, they want it out of greed, lust, or ego.
Or because it's a drug.
Well, but it's a drug that feeds those three sources. Well, fortunately, I have no issues with greed or lust, and my connection with Judaism and my admiration for Moses keep my ego in check all the time. So here, I treat this as a job, and I came here solely for the glory. I'm interested in leaving a legacy. So I will write the pages of history that the Argentine people allow me to, and then I'll change jobs.
Inflation and the reduction of poverty have so far been the major achievements of your first 2 years. But although inflation has dropped enormously in Argentina, and although poverty has also decreased, if I'm not mistaken, to 27%, according to
official data, let me explain just to give you a sense of scale.
But let me ask you a follow-up question.
All right, go ahead, finish, and then I'll explain everything together at once.
Even though inflation dropped significantly, and that's a major achievement, and even though poverty fell to 27.5%, if I'm not mistaken, consumption has also dropped dramatically. The people I've been talking to these days in Buenos Aires tell me that consumption has dropped enormously. How do you explain that poverty goes down while consumption also goes down?
I'll explain it to you now. It's strange, isn't it? Let's talk about this topic. When we took office, the inflation rate was running at 1.5% daily. Even though the year ended at 211, and when you looked at the year over year, it reached a peak of 300, then dropped to 117, and this year it's at 31. That is, if you take the wholesale index at its peak, it was 54% monthly, which annualized gives you 17,000. And today, wholesale inflation for this year ends up around 24%, meaning the latest figure was 1.3. In other words, the disinflation process is working in a significant way. We estimate that since the money supply was fixed in the middle of last year, and given the lags of monetary policy, the inflation rate should start at zero from the middle of next year. By
mid-2026.
Exactly. That said, one important thing is that inflation is a tax, an ultra-regressive one that hits the most vulnerable the hardest. The flip side of this is that when we made the macroeconomy transparent and measured poverty on a monthly basis, it jumped to 57% as a result of price controls, as a result of shortages, which meant it wasn't reflected in the statistics, but the data was there. Moreover, it was measured every 6 months, so that swept a lot of dirt under the rug. But there was so much that it had become a mountain. That number today is 27.5, as you said, and it meant a drop of 30 points. In other words, about 13 or 14 million Argentinians came out of poverty. That's the first point. The second point is that the Argentine economy hit bottom in April 2024, and from then on it began to grow strongly. And Argentina is close to the highest GDP level observed in the historical series. If you look at consumption, it's also at its highest peak in the historical series. So, part of the problem is part of the narrative.
The opposition's narrative.
Of course, exactly. Where with surveys of questionable quality, to put it politely, not to say they're prefabricated to create an electoral narrative. In that context, what you have is that they started by saying that consumption, let's see. Do you know what happens? I could tell you, look. If you look at supermarket sales, shopping mall sales, they're clearly hit. But the thing is, you still haven't, let's say, Why don't they go and look at Mercado Libre's balance sheet? Then you'll see how consumption is rising. So, I mean, I think that focusing on isolated indicators or relying on doctored surveys to push an electoral narrative, I mean, let's look at the facts, but let's make it easier.
The facts, Mr. President, are that the macroeconomy has improved a lot. No?
But and behind the macroeconomy, there are people.
Well, but the microeconomy...
That's a pointless argument, typical of the ignorant.
It's a...
Macroeconomics is the sum of microeconomics. In other words, that dichotomy doesn't exist. Yes, but...
The time frames, no.
That dichotomy doesn't exist. That's a problem of professional malpractice among economists who are stuck in terms of economic theory prior to 1968. So, I mean, what do you want to do? Defend ignorant economists? I refuse to do that because it's wrong. No.
No, Mr. President, what I was...
doing was... But I'm telling you that it's wrong. I'm giving you a technical explanation of why it's wrong. So what... But I'm going to put it to you the other way around. You know that a company's return is margin times turnover. If you accumulate a lot of inventory, you have a problem because your asset turnover drops and your profitability is destroyed. Are we good up to this point?
Yes, we're good up to there.
So if you tell me, if I'm seeing the GDP hitting its historical peak and you tell me that consumption is going down, look, that's a problem because it means you're making a massive investment in inventory and it's destroying the economy's profitability. That's not what's happening. Nobody does that. Nobody overstocks just to destroy their return. And when you look at the consumption statistics, consumption has gone up. Why? Because people aren't buying through the same channels as before. That's what's happening. So it's not my fault that the opposition pushes certain narratives and there are careless people who buy into them even when the hard data says otherwise.
Mr. President, the hard data speaks well of what you all have done, but the people I talk to, shopkeepers, in the few days I've been in Buenos Aires, and...
Is that what you call statistics?
Obviously not.
Well, then let's talk...
Seriously.
Be serious.
But anecdotal evidence does have some value.
Yes, journalistically, of course. If God comes down here and...
Or...
I mean, that's called the fallacy of the whole for the part, or you're cherry picking. You take the case you don't like and you...
display it.
Television is full of that.
Mr. President, but I have a bit of experience and I've seen a lot of statistics.
Now you're using the authority fallacy.
No, Mr. President. I'm telling you that a lot of people who voted for you thank you, and who agree with you, and who say there's no other option.
15 million people voted for me. Did you talk to all 15 million?
Mr. President, let me finish the question. A lot of people I spoke with who voted for you, who still agree with you, who say that what came before was a disaster, said, when I asked them, I'm going to interview President Milei in a few days, what would you ask him? And they all told me the same thing. Ask him when. The macro will be reflected in the micro. That's what they tell me and what I'm asking you. I'm just conveying a message.
I understand that Argentina is heavily dominated by economists with very poor training. And they draw a line between the micro and the macro that doesn't actually exist. Moreover, the media play a role. So what happens? I cut off their official advertising funds. So everything that happens, the good things, they downplay. Things that aren't so good, they portray as bad. And if something actually bad happens, it's a catastrophe. So there's a bias, let's say, in how you're receiving information. When you look at the surveys, this is very interesting. It's interesting because when you ask people about their personal situation, both current and expected, the numbers at the personal level are always much better than the macro level. Why is that? Because let's say you can answer about what's happening to you, but when you're asked about the macro level, you're not a specialist. So what do? You go and listen. I mean, suddenly you hear economists who, over the past 2 years, have gotten everything wrong. So what value does the opinion of an economist who got everything wrong have?
Mr. President, speaking of this last point, many people have said, and it's been written in many newspapers, that in recent months you have become more moderate. That before you used to insult journalists, insult economists. You said the same things you're saying now, but with personal insults. And now you've become more moderate. So which is the real you? The one from before or the one now? Which is the real Ramila? The one from before or the one now?
Well, let's say people also evolve. But again, but it's not something where there's a sudden change, there's a whole evolution. So obviously, if you take a video of me from 15 years ago, the way I handled things, no.
I'm talking about 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
Man, and
what's the evolution? I mean, what made you tone down the confrontational approach a bit?
It's just that when it comes to the things I confront, I still confront them the same way. When it comes to theft, lies, slander, defamation, with all of those various negative values, it remains exactly the same. And with injustice too, with those things, it is still just the same. But in the meantime, there is a profound sense of learning taking place. Over these last 9 months, I've gone through a very intense and demanding learning process where what I thought was monstrous is actually much more monstrous than I believed. Fortunately, when I design policies, I do so with a strong risk-averse perspective, so we're always prepared for bad scenarios. But in the meantime, we have recently gone through a very, very intense and demanding learning process. And that experience also significantly helps us to constantly adjust our ideas.
You're talking about the Buenos Aires city elections, which you lost before winning the elections. No.
Buenos Aires city we won, the ones in Buenos Aires province.
Buenos Aires province.
But I'm talking about the whole process that went from March until the end of October. It's an entire process. And there, let's say, I learned a lot of things. And the learning was so profound that I became much more deeply aware of the things I don't know. If you'll allow me, I'll use a metaphor that I learned from our liberalism hero, Alberto Venegas Linchijo, which he in turn learned from a professor in the United States. He drew two circles, one very small and one very large. He said what is inside the circle is knowledge. When you have a small amount of knowledge, you have a small idea of what you don't know, just a tiny bit. When you learn a lot, you start to become acutely aware of how much you don't know. Now let's go to one of my answers. What did I say to you? The day I leave office, the day I finish this job, because to me, it's a job. Not only will I not give my opinion on what politicians in other countries should do, I wouldn't even do it in the case of Argentina.
Mr. President, there has been a lot of speculation that your sister, Karina, is taking on an increasingly prominent political profile. Do you rule out the possibility of her running for something in the future?
I'm going to answer based on my own experience. In 2018, right at the very end of the year, inside a famous nightclub known as New York City, which has a Statue of Liberty, that's why we like to celebrate the end of the year there, Professor Spurt launched his presidential campaign. So Professor Alberto Venegas Lynch Jr. comes over, pulls me aside and says, Javier, you're not going to get involved in this because we need you in the cultural battle. Then I told him, no, Professor, not at all. Look where I am now. I mean, if I was this wrong in my own case, what can I say about my sister's case? I mean...
So you're telling me that...
No.
Keep it.
No, what I'm telling you is that I don't know. Because I do know the circumstances and the factors that led me to this, to make this decision. But let's say this isn't free, it comes with a lot of costs. So why does one pay these costs? I mean, why do I pay all the costs I pay in terms of lies, slander, defamation, all the horrendous atrocities that have been said, are being said, and will continue to be said?
President, may I...
Give me a second. So why do I do it? I do it for the glory, I do it for the recognition, but that's a personal decision. And it's up to each person. Me, let's say, I mean, if you want, I invite you to go to my sister's office, which is right next door, and ask her to see if she's interested. I'm telling you, when they asked me, I said one thing, and life changed for me in such a way that I ended up being president.
Mr. President, I'm told we're out of time, but I want to ask one last quick question. Your government has been touched, affected by some so-called corruption scandals, like the case of the Libra cryptocurrency. What measures are you going to take?
Yourself. Yes, in the United States, they've already released the funds to Davis, and it's clear there was no fraud, that there was nothing. That is to say, it was a group of people who entered a very particular market meant for very few people and who knew the risk they were taking. Therefore, there was no deception, no fraud, nothing at all. But politically, it caused a huge stir.
What measures will you take in 2026 to prevent even the possibility? And
I am much more cautious now. Look, I thought the idea was brilliant. Ex ante, the decision seemed right to me. But ex post, with everything that happened to me, I won't do it again.
finally, because they're kicking me out, which one? No, you? We're out of time, but quickly, very quickly. 3 fundamental objectives for 2026.
Sustainable growth, steadily reducing poverty, and effectively eradicating inflation.
Yes, but in concrete terms, laws, measures.
Well, everything I promised during the campaign, I sent to extraordinary sessions. The budget with zero deficit has already been approved. Fiscal innocence has already been approved. Labor modernization and the glacier law have committee approval in the Senate. And also, let's say, the tax reform and everything related to are waiting to be introduced. The toughening of the penal code, that which was my campaign promise for the next 2 years, when will I finish it? On March 1st, when I start the regular sessions, it will already be done. From there, the next stage is the May Council, which basically consists of 9 points. For instance, take private property. Do you know what the flip side of that is? It's pushing the deregulation agenda. Let's say, well, things along those lines. I mean, like it's a set of reforms. There are 332 pages there, which is just one small part of what's coming. It's only one part. In other words, there's much more. But anyway, after this, once the extraordinary session is closed, and with that, I fulfilled all my campaign promises for the midterm election, I'll move on to advancing what's called the May Council, and then we have many more reforms. Just so you have an idea, there are 600,000 decrees that are holding back the economy. So we've been working on about 70,000 of them. Do you know why? Because those are the ones that are digitized. So as soon as we finish that, let's say, once we have it all digitized, we're going to go after those 530,000 that we still haven't been able to look at. Not only that. So just imagine we carried out 13,000 structural reforms in 2 years. And do you know what I plan to do? Not just the most reformist government in Argentina's history, but in the history of humanity. That is to say, I am deeply committed to making Argentina the freest economy in the world. I mean, will I be able to achieve it or not? And if I don't achieve it, I hope that whoever comes after me will.
President Javier Milei, thank you very much for your time.
Andres, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for allowing